Aunt Lucinda here again, boys and girls. Good to see ya and to have you join me again for another couple chapters of the field guide from the Spiderwick Chronicles. So, last chapter, Jared found a book, and the book was about something really strange. Stuff had happened to Mallory too. And how did Jared think all that stuff had happened to her? Well, we kind of might find out a little bit more in the next two chapters, chapters 3 and 4. And there are some words again. Aunt Lucinda always has to give you vocabulary like your librarian teacher says. So let's start with the words and then we'll get into the story. The first word you're going to hear is ruthless. That just means someone would do anything to win, even if it's cruel, or giving the other person no chance. Carriage house, that's another word. And carriage house, it's just an old outbuilding that used to contain carriages, horses, and their different equipment to connect the horses to the carriage. Remember, my house is a Victorian, so it means that it was built in the 1800s, and that's how people would get around in carriages. Parries is another word you're going to hear. Remember that Mallory is a fencer, meaning she sword fights as a sport. Parries means that you're blocking or you're rebounding blows, that someone is hitting at you with their sword. So that's what parries means, to block it, to get past it. Surname. Surname is just a last name. So whatever your last name is, that's also called a surname. Maiden name. A maiden name is a name a woman has as a last name before she gets married and takes her husband's last name. Nowadays, women don't always do that, but it happened all the time in the 1800s and the early 1900s. Bogart is a word you're going to hear too. And Bogart is a type thing or spirit from folktale of Ireland and England. And it's a little creature that can shapeshift and change into anything. And a lot of times it changes into stuff that that person it wants to scare is afraid of. Apothecary. That is someone who knows how to take items and turn them into medicine, like plants or other types of drugs that are legal. Liberally. Liberally means that you take something and you're generous with it. You spread it around a lot. You got a lot of it, so you give lots of it away. Luminous. That's a word that means something kind of lights up the room or lights up the area. And soliloquy is something from plays and theatre. And a soliloquy is when an actor is doing a play and he's the only one talking and giving his thoughts, and it's like he's talking to the audience. All right, so let's see what happens with Jared. He went up into the attic, he found a book, and he's trying to convince Mallory and Jared that the book is true and real. Let's see if he has any luck with that. And also what's going to happen with his mom. She thinks that he did some bad things to Mallory. And we will find out. Okay, enjoy the next few chapters of Spiderwick. Chapter 5. He just wanted to keep reading. In which Jared reads a book and sets a trap. Mallory and Simon were out on the lawn fencing when Jared found them. Mallory's ponytail stuck out the back of her fencing helmet, and Jared could see that it was shorter than it had once been. She was apparently trying to make up for her earlier weakness by ruthless fencing. Simon couldn't seem to get a strike in at all. He was being backed against the side of a broken-down carriage house, his parries becoming increasingly desperate. I found something, Jared called. Simon turned his helmeted head. Mallory took that opportunity to strike, pushing the rubber tip of her fencing foil against his chest. "That's 3 to zip," Mallory said. "I creamed you." "You cheated," he complained. "Well, you allowed yourself to become distracted," Mallory countered. Simon pulled the helmet off his head, flung it down, and looked at Jared. "Thanks a lot." "Sorry," Jared said automatically. "You're the one that's always fencing with her. I just came out here to catch tadpoles." Simon scowled. "Well, I was busy. Just because I don't have a bunch of dumb animals to take care of doesn't mean I can't be busy," Jared shot back. "Just shut up, both of you." Mallory took off her own helmet. Her face was flushed. "What did you find?" Jared tried to recapture some of his earlier excitement. "A book in the attic. It's about fairies. Real fairies. Look, they're ugly." Mallory took the book out of his hands and looked it over. "This is baby stuff, a storybook." "It's not," Jared said defensively. "It's a field guide, like for birds, so you know how to spot the different kinds." "You think a fairy tied my hair to my bed?" Mallory asked. "Mom thinks you did it. She thinks you've been acting weird ever since Dad left, like getting into all those fights at school." Simon didn't say anything. "But you don't think that." Jared hoped she would agree. "And you always get into fights." Mallory took a deep breath. "I don't think you're stupid enough to have done it," she said, holding up a fist to show what she was going to do to whatever had. "But I don't think it was fairies either." Over dinner, their mother was oddly quiet as she slid chicken and mashed potatoes onto their plates. Mallory wasn't talking that much either, but Simon was going on and on about the tadpoles he had found and how they were going to be frogs in no time because they already had little arms. Jared had seen them. They had a long way to go. What Simon called arms looked a lot more like fish zits. "Mom," Jared said finally, "do we have a relative named Arthur?" Their mother looked up suspiciously from her dinner. "No, I don't think so. Why do you ask?" "I was just wondering," Jared mumbled. "What about Spiderwick?" "Well, that's your great aunt Lucinda's surname," his mother said. "It was my mother's maiden name. Maybe Arthur was one of her relatives. Now, tell me why you want to know all this." "I just found some of his stuff in the attic, that's all," Jared said. "In the attic?" His mother almost spilled her iced tea. "Jared Grace, as you know, half of the entire second floor is so rotted that if you step wrong, you'll find yourself in the downstairs parlor." "I stayed on the safe side," Jared protested. "We don't know if there is a safe side in the attic. I don't want anyone playing up there, especially you," she said, looking right at Jared. He bit his lip. "Especially you?" Jared didn't say a thing for the rest of dinner. "Are you going to read that all night?" Simon asked. He was sitting on his side of the room. Jeffrey and Lemon Drop were running around on the comforter, and his new tadpoles were set up in one of the fish tanks. "Well, so what if I do?" Jared asked. With each crumbling page, Jared was learning strange facts. Could there really be brownies in his house? Pixies in his yard? Nixies in the stream out back? The book made them so real. He didn't want to talk to anyone right now, not even Simon. He just wanted to keep reading. "I don't know," Simon said. "I thought maybe you'd be bored by now. You don't usually like to read." Jared looked up and blinked. It was true. Simon was the reader. Jared mostly just got in trouble. He turned a page. "I can read if I want to." Simon yawned. "Are you worried about falling asleep? I mean, what might happen tonight?" "Look at this." Jared flipped to a page close to the front. "There's this fairy called a brownie." "You mean like Girl Scouts?" "I don't know," Jared said. "Like this, look." He pushed the page in front of Simon. On the yellowed paper was an ink drawing of a little man posed with a feather duster made from a badminton birdie and a straight pin. Next to it was a hunched figure, also small, but this one held a piece of broken glass. "What's that?" Simon pointed to the second figure, intrigued despite of himself. "This guy says it's a Bogart. See? Brownies are these helpful guys, but then if you make them mad, they go crazy. They start doing all these bad things, and you can't stop them. Then they become Bogarts. That's what I think we have." "You think we made it mad by messing up his house?" "Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it was kind of wacky before that. I mean, look at this guy." Jared pointed to the brownie. "He's not the type to live in a skeevy house decorated with dead bugs." Simon nodded, looking at the pictures. "Since you found the book in the house," he said, "do you think it's a picture of our Bogart?" "I never thought of that," Jared said quietly. "It makes sense, though." "Does it say in the book what we should do?" Jared shook his head. "It talks about different ways to catch it. Not catch it for real, but see it or get evidence." "Jared?" Simon sounded doubtful. "Mom said to close the door and stay in here. Last thing she needs is another reason to believe that you were the one who attacked Mallory." Household Bogart. "But she thinks it was me anyway. If something happens tonight, she'll think it was me too." "No, she won't. I'll tell her you were here all night. And besides, that way we can make sure nothing happens to either one of us." "Well, what about Mallory?" Jared asked. Simon shrugged. "I saw her getting into bed with one of her fencing swords. I wouldn't mess with her." "Yeah." Jared got into bed and opened the book again. "I'm just going to read a little more." Simon nodded and got up to put the mice back in their tanks. Then he got into bed and pulled the covers over his head with a mumbled, "Good night." As Jared read, each page took him deeper into the strange world of forest and stream, alive with creatures that seemed so close that he could almost stroke the slick, scaly flanks of the mermaids. He could almost feel the heat of the troll's breath and hear the rumble of the dwarven forges. When he turned the last page, it was late at night. Simon was bundled up so that Jared could see only the top of his head. Jared listened hard, but the only sounds in the house were the wind whistling through the roof above them and water gurgling through the pipes. No scuttling or screaming. Even Simon's beasts were asleep. Jared flipped to the page that read, "Bogarts. They delight in tormenting those they once protected and will cause milk to sour, doors to slam, dogs to go lame, and other malicious mischief." Simon believed him, sort of anyway, but Mallory and their mom wouldn't. And besides, he and Simon were twins. It almost didn't count for anything that Simon believed him. Jared looked at the suggestion of the book. Scattering sugar or flour on the floor is one way of obtaining footprints. If he had footprints to show them, then they'd have to believe him. Jared opened the door and crept downstairs. It was dark in the kitchen and everything was quiet. He tiptoed across the cool tile to where his mother had put the flour in an old glass apothecary jar on the countertop. He took out several handfuls and scattered them liberally onto the floor. It didn't look like much. He wasn't sure how well footprints would show up in it. Maybe the Bogart wouldn't even walk across the kitchen floor. So far, it seemed to stick to moving through the walls. He thought about what he knew about Bogarts from the book. Malicious, hateful, hard to get rid of. In their brownie form, they were helpful and nice. They did all kinds of work for a plain old bowl of milk. Maybe. Jared went over to the fridge and poured milk into a small saucer. Maybe if he left it out, the creature would be tempted to come out of the walls and leave footprints in the flour. But when he looked at the saucer of milk there on the floor, he couldn't help feeling a little bit bad and a little bit weird at the same time. In the first place, it was weird that he was down here, setting a trap for something that he didn't even know if he would have believed in 2 weeks ago. But the reason he felt bad was, well, he knew what it was like to be mad, and he knew how easy it was to get into a fight, even if you were really mad at someone else. And he thought that just maybe that was how the Bogart felt. But then he noticed something else. He'd left footprints of his own in the flour all the way from the milk back to the hall. Crud, he muttered as he went to get the broom. The light cracked on. Jared Grace! It was his mother's voice coming from the top of the stairs. Jared turned fast, but he knew how guilty he looked. Get back to bed, she said. I was just trying to get... But she didn't let him finish. Now, mister, go! After he thought about it for a minute, he was glad she'd interrupted him. His Bogart idea probably wouldn't have been a big hit. With a look back over his shoulder at the flour dusting the floor, Jared slunk up the stairs. The kitchen was a mess. Chapter 6, in which they find unexpected things in the icebox. Jared rolled over at the sound of his mother's voice. She was angry. Jared, you better get up! What's going on? Jared asked sleepily, peering up from the covers. For a second he thought he'd missed school, until he remembered they'd moved and not even so much as set foot in this new school yet. Up, Jared, his mother said. You want to pretend you don't know? Fine, let's go downstairs so you can see what's going on. The kitchen was a mess. Mallory had a broom and was sweeping up broken pieces of porcelain bowls. The walls were painted with chocolate, syrup, and orange juice. Raw eggs oozed down the window panes. Simon was sitting at the kitchen table. His arms were covered with the same bruises Mallory had been wearing only a day before, and his eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying. Well? His mother asked expectantly. I didn't do this, Jared said, looking around at them. They couldn't really believe he would do something like this, could they? And there, on the floor of the kitchen, next to drifts of cereal and scattered pieces of orange peel, Jared saw small tracks in the floor. They were the size of little fingers, and he could clearly see the imprint of the heel of a foot and a feathering in the front that might have been from toes. Look, Jared said, pointing. See, the little footprints. Mallory looked up at him, and her eyes were narrow with fury. Just shut up, Jared. Mom says she saw you down here last night. You made those footprints. I did not, Jared yelled back. Why don't you look in the freezer then, huh? What? Jared asked. Simon gave an especially wet-sounding sob. Their mother took the broom from Mallory's hand and started sweeping up the flour and cereal. Mom, no, the footprints, Jared said, but his mother didn't pay any attention to him. 2 strokes of the broom, and the only proof he had was swept into a pile of rubbish. Mallory opened the freezer door. Each of Simon's tadpoles was frozen into a single cube in the tray. Next to them was a note written in ink on a piece of a cereal box. Not very nice to ice the mice. And Jeffrey and Lemon Drop are gone, Simon said. Now why don't you tell us what you did with your brother's mice, said his mother. Mom, I didn't do it. I really didn't. Mallory gripped Jared by the shoulder. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're about to start regretting it. Mallory, their mother cautioned. His sister let go, but the look she gave him carried the promise of later violence. Mom, I didn't do it. I don't think Jared did it, Simon said, between sniffs. I think it was the Bogart. Their mother said nothing. The look on her face said that manipulating Simon was the worst thing Jared had done. Jared, she said, start taking this trash out to the front. If you thought this was funny, let's see how funny you think it is when you spend the rest of today cleaning it up. Jared hung his head. He had no way of making her believe him. Silently, he got dressed, then gathering up 3 black garbage bags and started dragging them toward the front of the house. Outside, the weather was warm and the sky was blue. The air smelled of pine needles and freshly mown grass, but daylight didn't seem to be any comfort at all. One of the bags snagged on a branch, and when Jared tugged, the plastic ripped. Groaning, he dropped the bags and surveyed the damage. The tear was large and most of the garbage had spilled out. As he started to gather things up, he realized what he was holding: the contents of the creature's house. He looked at the worn bits of cloth, the doll's head, and the pins with pearl tops. In the daylight, there were other things he had not noticed before. There had been Robin's egg, but it was crushed. Tiny slips of newspaper were scattered throughout, each one with a different strange word on it. Luminous, read one. Soliloquy, read another. Gathering up all the pieces of the nest, Jared put them carefully aside from the rest of the trash. Could he make a new house for the Bogart? Would it matter? Could that stop it? He thought about Simon crying and about the poor, stupid tadpoles frozen in ice cubes. He didn't want to help the Bogart. He wanted to catch it and kick it and make it sorry it ever came out of the wall. Dragging the rest of the bags to the front lawn, he looked at the pile of the Bogart's things, still not sure whether he was going to burn them or give them back or what. He carried them inside. His mother was standing in the doorway waiting for him. "What's all that?" she asked. "Nothing," Jared said. For once, she didn't question him, at least not about the junk pile in his hands. "Jared, I know you're upset about your father leaving. We're all upset." Jared looked at his shoes in discomfort. Just because he was upset about his father leaving did not mean he had trashed their new house, or pinched his brother black and blue, or tied his sister's hair to her headboard. "So?" he asked, thinking that her silence meant she was waiting for a response. "So?" she repeated. "So you need to stop letting your anger control you, Jared Grace. Your sister works things out when she's fencing, and your brother has his animals, but you—" "I didn't do it," Jared said. "Why won't you believe me? Is it because of the fight at school?" "I have to admit," his mother said, "I was shocked to learn that you broke a boy's nose. That is just the kind of thing I'm talking about. Simon doesn't get into fights, and neither did you before your father left." He studied his shoes even more intently. "Can I go inside now?" She nodded, but then she stopped him with one hand on his shoulder. "If anything else happens around here, I'm going to have to take you to see someone. Do you understand?" Jared nodded, but he felt weird. He remembered what he had said about Aunt Lucy and the nut house and suddenly felt very, very sorry. Okay, so now we've just heard what happened in chapters 5 and 6, and Aunt Lucinda made a mistake earlier talking about chapters 3 and 4. We read that the week before this. Well, Jared has a book. He is trying to get Mallory and Simon to believe that it's true, but Mallory says that it's baby stuff. And with Mallory, what does Jared notice about her? And how is she trying to act and win when she's fencing Simon? And how is she trying to get over what happened to her that morning with whatever did the stuff to her hair and to her body? Also, what happened with Jared and his mum? Now, I think that his mom still doesn't trust Jared, still thinks that Jared is the one who did this stuff to Mallory. And Simon's not really believing that there's anything in the house that could be doing the stuff to Mallory too. Not too much, at least. So what does Jared do to try to prove that there's some type of creature in the house? and what happens when Mom comes and catches him. And of course, Mom had told him to stay in his bedroom that night, and he was caught out of the bedroom, right? Doing what? What was he up to? Also, the next morning, what happens between him and his mum? What happened to the area where Jared was found that night? So Jared's in a wee bit of trouble again, and no one's really believing that he found real stuff in that book. So I guess we'll find out in chapter 7 and 8. And then I think we only have about 2 more chapters left after that. 9 and 10 should be the last chapters. So let me know if you're liking the story. Miss Bell chose it because it's one of her favorite stories, and she asked Aunt Lucinda to introduce it to you all. So comment, go down to the very bottom of YouTube if you're on your phone, or comment on your computer, laptop, tablet. Remember, you can also go to Schoology and discuss the story with Miss Bell. All right, so we'll see you next week with chapters, I believe, 7 and 8. Have a good day, good evening, good night, and watch out for wee people.